of Tequila Tuesday. 88 weeks we've put these events on for everybody. A lot of fun. We learn a lot, goof around just a little bit, make some good connections, get introduced to some new topics. And today is a topic that we haven't touched on in quite a while. Maybe we did way at the beginning. We talked a little bit about buyer psychology, certainly not from a standpoint of sales introverts, which our friend Kyle Asay, who is the RVP of North America at MongoDB, is going to talk with us a little bit about today. So without further ado, Kyle, take it away, man. Thanks for coming. Happy to have you here.
It's a 88. Sounds like a lucky number. So I'll take it.
It's all yours.
Hey, everyone. Kyle Asay joined MongoDB about 10 months ago. I currently run North America for our acquisition org. So all about acquiring new logos, going from zero spend to hopefully a lot of spend. I also started Sales Introverts about 18 months ago. And honestly, it started because I was so frustrated with LinkedIn, with all of the garbage content that was posted by a lot of people that didn't really know what they were talking about. So I figured, what if I started to post and if I tried to be somewhat helpful, maybe I could help a few people. And it's grown a lot more than I really thought it would. And it's also helped me connect to some awesome people like Ryan and Scott. So I'm grateful for it. The topic of buyer psychology, I think really I started thinking about this, not intentionally, but years ago, when I noticed in my sales process this unnatural, uncomfortable friction with buyers, where I was trying to bring them through the linear sales process and they were getting frustrated with this very take-heavy motion. And I found that because I was frustrating them with this friction, I was unable to add any positive friction in challenging the way they thought about evaluation, about the way they thought about their ideal state. I was basically using up all of my possible goodwill by withholding information from them and really establishing the biases that they had were true. And so I began to shift my process to better align with how buyers think about the sales process. And a lot of the success that I've enjoyed has come as a result of that. And so today I'll walk through why I have found this to be so important, and then we'll dive pretty at a tactical level into the discovery part of this guide, where we'll talk about a lot of the biases our buyers have going into discovery, and then how a lot of the time we lead off the call by saying things that validate their bias that give us a really massive uphill battle that makes it really, really challenging to even get through. So let's let me go here. Okay. So a few reasons why I find this topic incredibly important. Number one is how people evaluate things and think about things. Sellers often try to lead with logic. I see all sorts of emails and messaging around, hey, our solution has this level of ROI, our payback period is 2 months, all these really nice sounding facts that don't work. Like if you think about it, if facts actually sold, all we'd have to do is get the most recent Forrester report or ROI study onto every economic buyer's desk. They'd see it and go, okay, yeah, ROI, that's proven, let's move forward. But nobody actually processes information and purchases that way. We make decisions emotionally, and then we do the best we can to validate logically. And so buyer psychology matters first and foremost, because if you can't influence psychology, you can't influence emotion. And if you can't influence emotion, you can't influence decision-making. The second piece is we all have heard the nonstop talking about how much harder it is to sell right now, longer sales process, more people involved. The impact of that is also felt by our buyer. I'm seeing that at Mongo right now. I'm trying to procure a couple of solutions, and it is absolutely exhausting. I know how hard it is to get budget. I know how many people have to sign off. And I find myself losing motivation to push it through until I remember what will personally benefit me. Okay, people don't go buy things to make their company better unless they're the CEO, CFO. People go buy things to do better at their job. That can then often lead to the company being better. But if we're not personally motivating our buyers, our deal is never going to make it to the person that cares about the company to sign the contract. It's going to die well before them. And so buyer psychology matters because if you don't understand what motivates them, you can't motivate them. Another piece that I'm big on is a scary piece. I remember being on a lot of calls, especially early in my career, where I would show something in the demo or I would explain something in a discovery call. And then a few minutes later, my buyer would ask the question, hey, do you offer? And then they'd ask me if we offer what we just showed them. I'd be like, yeah, we offered that. I literally just showed you 5 minutes ago. Weren't you watching? And the answer is no, they probably weren't. They were in Slack, they were in email, they were on their phone, they weren't paying attention. We have all lost deals because our buyers didn't think we could do something that we actually showed them we could do, which is a terrifying thought to me because sales isn't just about making sure you show all the right things, say all the right things. It's making sure that people hear, understand, and retain what they need to purchase our solution. And then finally, people always forget facts. If you think about all the sales calls and presentations you've sat through, you're never going to remember the specific data behind the case study. You are going to remember how you felt. If you feel an element of FOMO, if you feel any kind of fear, if you feel any kind of excitement, that's what you're going to remember. And buyer psychology, understanding it, will help you influence feelings so people actually remember what you need them to take away from your sales presentations. So that's why I think buyer psychology matters. Any questions on why I think is important before we move on to some of the advice of how to actually influence it?
A question. You mentioned this phrase positive friction in the sales process. Can you provide some examples of what you would call positive friction and things to look for? I've never heard of that phrasing before. Super interesting.
So positive friction is all about the challenger sale correctly applied. It's when somebody says, here's what I think my solution should look like. And you tactfully push back on, well, people like you looking for that solution also usually need X, Y, and Z. So you help expand what they think success looks like, or the solution should look like. Positive friction is teaching and challenging of the best way to get to their optimal solution, bringing insights that you have from your experience in their industry or with your solution. Negative friction is, hey, I really need to understand how your pricing works before we move forward. So I know it's a good use of my time. And the seller is saying, oh, it's so complex, I can't even begin to give you price, because you're thinking, I don't want to give price till I build a value. Or somebody's saying, can I just quickly see a demo so I can get some context for what you do? And the seller is saying, no, we need to do 2 more full discoveries, bring in my director, and then I'll show you a demo. That's all really negative friction. That is seller forced, not buyer centric. That's how I look at those two. When I'm thinking about buyer psychology, this is the question I always come back to when I'm teaching it, whether I'm teaching top of funnel, middle of funnel, or bottom of the funnel. And it forces you to get into the head of your buyers. And the question I want you to be able to answer is, what is the email they never want to get from their boss? So like for me as a sales leader, I never want to hear from my boss, dude, your forecast just dropped a ton the last day of the quarter. How did you not see this coming? Because that's a direct attack on my ability to forecast my business, manage deal cycles, understand my team. It basically rips apart everything I'm supposed to be good at as a sales leader. When I'm selling MongoDB, but the people never want to hear from their boss says, hey, we just had a security breach, or our database went down, our app crashed. How could you let that happen? If you are unable to answer this question for your buyers, you're going to have a really hard time appealing to them emotionally and helping them avoid that terrible outcome. Statistically speaking, more people are incentivized to get away from pain than they are to go towards good things, especially in the business sense. And so being able to understand what is their biggest fear and how can you possibly help them is the foundation to buyer psychology. Cool. So as you're thinking about your deal cycles, go review your current deals and think about for your champion, what are they afraid of hearing from their leadership? And how can you help them make sure they never get that email or that phone call, and you're on the right track for the foundation. But let's go specifically into the discovery part of the sales cycle for tonight's training. I don't think any buyer actually wants to do discovery calls with reps. If they do, they're probably a little bit insane because they know what they're committing to. Okay, when you commit to a discovery call, you're one committing to answer a bunch of questions, and then you're committing to whether or not there's a fit to get follow-up emails for the next 3 to 9 months, depending on how persistent the rep is. Right, it's a lot, and if there is a good fit, you're committing to 2 to 6 months of internal navigation, approvals, working with IT, working with security to make the purchase. And so it's not something that most people wake up excited to go do. And to compound this problem, the fears that buyers have about discovery, reps almost immediately go compound by how they approach the call. So these are some of the biggest concerns that I've seen in discovery that buyers have going in. The first one is they don't know anything about me. They don't know me as an individual. They don't know my industry. Like I think about when I get on the call and somebody says, Kyle, tell me about your role. And I lose all patience because I'm like, how, you don't know anything about my role? Do I talk about forecasting, performance management, recruiting? Like I could go so many different ways with that question. And when I hear that question, I wonder if you don't know what I do or what I care about, how on earth are you confident that you have a solution to actually make my world better? So if you're number one, I'm about to get on a call with somebody, they're not going to know anything about me, and I'm going to spend a half hour teaching them about my world just for them to say, oh, great. Thank you so much for breaking this down for me. I really think we can help you. When do you have an hour to dive deeper? And they still have no idea what you do or how you could help them. And that's when you're almost always going to hear, you know what, just send me a case study and I'll get back to you. And then you never, ever hear from them again. The second fear that people have is it's not going to be a conversation. It's going to be an interrogation. There's going to be a rep with their long list of questions, and they're just going to bombard them in a pretty scripted order of all the things they want to understand about you. And nobody wants to sit through that because it's uncomfortable. And then finally, the fear that buyers have is there's not going to be transparency and honesty. They're like, look, the point of discovery should be to mutually agree if there might be a fit here to further explore. However, most reps are going to try to convert the initial meeting to an opportunity regardless of fit. They're going to do all they can to secure next steps, even if they're not confident there's a fit, because they want the opportunity, they want pipeline, they want to tell their manager, they convert the initial meeting. And so the buyer feels like, look, I'm going to have to go sift through all of the crap the seller tells me just to see if there really is an opportunity here for me to improve whatever I care about. They're not going to filter me out. I have to filter them out. And so what's happening here is the buyer feels this burden until they feel that the rep is willing to take the burden off of them. They feel the burden of educating the seller. They feel the burden of being bombarded by questions. And then they feel the burden of figuring out if the solution will actually work for them, because they don't think the seller would ever say, you know what, I don't think we're a fit. Here's why, and then move on. All of that falls on the buyer.
Kyle,
yes.
And I pepper in one of the things that's top of mind when you talk about this. And there's how many instances where that person, the stakeholder that you're engaging with, representing the buyer, is not the end-all be-all decision maker. So that they have sort of that burden to then protect the rest of their organization or the folks they're reporting into, to be that first line of defense before they even allow you to get involved with the people that can actually sign the check or make the determination to move forward. I just feel like that's just an additional layer of security that goes up, turns it into more of a combative interaction from the jump, as opposed to an actual discovery to figure out if there's mutual fit for you to work together.
All the time. In fact, very rarely is that first person going to be the person that goes all the way through the deal and signs the contract, right? And so what's happening is if you're putting this burden on them and then you're asking them to go talk to their boss or their boss's boss, they're like, no way. Because you're going to get on this call and make me look bad by putting this burden on my C-level sponsor for this project, right? Like when you go to ask, I say this all the time, but when you're asking for a referral to an org, you're not asking them for a quick intro. You're asking them to bet their credibility on you. And if you haven't shown that you'll take the burden on throughout the discovery process, there's no way they're going to bet their credibility on the seller and make that connection to continue the process. So let's talk about how we can actually proactively overcome these. Okay, because if we don't proactively overcome the buyer bias, the buyer keeps the bias, and bias prevents them from hearing and retaining what you need them to hear and retain to actually progress your deal. And so the first one, the rep doesn't know them or their industry. You always need to have a point of view. And my favorite phrase for this is to have a strong opinion loosely held. Because I get pushback on this sometimes. People say, well, Kyle, in discovery, you're supposed to go and just be open to anything, open to any possible solution, really let the buyer teach you and walk you through that. Which in a perfect world where the buyer is super patient and this has all your best interests at heart, sure, that will work. But if I go into a discovery with this massive open world of possibilities and it's like, hey, Ryan, man, there are so many ways that I could help you. Let's start from the beginning. Tell me your life story. Tell me your personal motivations. Tell me all of your goals. Then I will go figure out which ones we align with. You lose people. And so you have the point of view, you have the strong opinion. Where you want to be flexible is if your point of view is wrong, you abandon it, and then you do discovery to pivot to where you should be. In my experience, a buyer is much more willing to engage with you if your point of view is slightly wrong and you let them correct you, rather than going in with a blank slate with no opinion and expecting them to go completely paint this canvas from nothing to help you understand how to sell to them. Going more specific into this point is the value hypothesis. When I say value hypothesis, it's the idea before I even talk to somebody in a discovery call, I need to have a hypothesis of if they were to buy my solution, how they would use it, and what benefits they would experience. If you don't have a hypothesis of value, if you don't have an idea from the beginning of how you could help them, why on earth would they want to meet with you? Like I still get these emails or LinkedIn messages. Can we have a conversation to explore mutual fit and synergy? No, like absolutely not. I'm sure I see Scott. I'm sure you get this all the time as well, Scott. Like it's a very, very common approach with this idea we should all just live in this kumbaya world and have these open conversations and just keep digging for where we can benefit each other, then sign these contracts. It's not how people actually evaluate things. And so when I'm going into a discovery call, I want to have an idea of, hey, if they were to evaluate, if they were to purchase, I have an idea of what it would look like. The point of discovery then is to validate exactly how we're going to get there and how it's an improvement on their current state. I'm not going to go in and talk to a developer or a CTO or a VP of sales and ask them to completely walk me through their entire process of everything. I have an idea of how they're likely handling their business. I share that with them, then ask them to validate and go deeper into this. I've listened to a lot of discovery calls where the rep will spend the first 20 to even 25 minutes covering level 1 types of questions. And level 1 questions are often things that can be uncovered through research before the call. And this is devastating because nothing valuable ever happens until we get to level 2 and level 3 questions. And if we don't get to level 2 or level 3 questions until there's 5 minutes left in the discovery call, you're out of luck. And so bringing a point of view, having the value hypothesis, presenting it to the buyer, and getting the validation or the rejection of it allows you to go deeper, fast forward through a lot of the level 1 questions, and actually have a discovery where you get to level 2, level 3, that will actually let you validate your hypothesis and get more specific in how you can help. And finally, I'm big on not doing agendas, but rather setting an objective. I don't even know. The vast majority of discovery calls start with an agenda. Hey, let's start with introductions. We'd love to hear about your role. We'd love to hear about your priorities. I'll tell you about our solution, and we can agree on next steps. Does that sound okay with you? And then the buyer says, yes, that sounds great. And then we just go into it, and it's just the same over and over and over again. When you go into a discovery, the buyer doesn't want to do any of those things. They don't care about what you do. They care about how you can possibly help them. And they don't want to go through a 30-minute call and not leave the call understanding what the possible benefit could be. And so the objective, I say right at the beginning, we're not going to end this call without me telling you explicitly how I think we can help you. And then you can decide if we should move forward in the evaluation. In order for me to get very specific in how we can help you, I need to better understand your role as it relates to specific areas. So if I'm selling Clarion to a VP of sales, it's by the end of the call today, I will be able to tell you specifically how our solution will help you improve your forecasting at the rep level, team level, and region level, while also highlighting the most important deals for you to focus on. In order to do that, I need to better understand how you're currently deciding what deals to review and how you forecast at the rep, team, and region level. Can we start there? It's a very different way to start the conversation than to tell me about your role, what are your priorities, and just starting with that blank canvas. Any questions on concern number 1 and how to overcome?
I have a question, Kyle. How do you think about how this plays into enabling or onboarding a new rep that's on your team? Like the idea of a value hypothesis, I think is brilliant. And I think a lot of sellers would be way better positioned to have more like fluid and informed conversations with prospects earlier on in their selling days in an organization if they just understood like basic value hypothesis of how the solution or the product or the service or whatever could solve problems for the prospect. So like, yeah, I'm just curious, and my mind always goes there. It's like the old way of how sales reps have been onboarded, hopefully now is dying because it's so terrible. How do you think about incorporating this into getting people up to speed quickly on what it is that y'all are selling?
Yeah, my initial priority, and it's a very relevant question. I'm onboarding 4 new reps right now. We just hired. Who do we sell to? What do they care about? How do they usually try to achieve what they care about? How can we help them do it better? How do we prove it? Because once somebody has that foundation, now they can actually go do pipe generation into that persona, because that's all you need, right? Then we go do some account tiering. So we're targeting the right accounts and the right people with the right messaging. And then we layer in discovery, solution presentation, the rest of the deal cycle. But it all begins with that foundation. Without that foundation, none of this works. And it's unfortunate because a lot of companies don't teach it in that order. They start a lot with the heavy product, the functionality, competitive differentiators. It all comes down to who do we sell to? What do they care about? How do they usually achieve what they care about? How can we help them achieve it better?
So I freaking love that. And I think a lot of people would be a lot more successful sooner in their sales career if they focused on that type of approach. The one thing, and we've been talking about a lot, we do this series on Thursday around building effective sales process. And the one thing that you mentioned, sort of tangentially related, that I think is so important that so many even seasoned sellers just fail to figure out is like, what is the risk that you run as a salesperson trying to help a prospect solve a problem where that problem might be solved without the use of any external help, and the prospect's then going to go try to solve that problem themselves with resources they have internally, maybe based off some of the guidance that you're providing them to help them understand what's actually going on. But like, how many salespeople get caught up in losing out the status quo because they were never really seriously considering thinking about getting external help for this in the first place, or you didn't prove enough value that you understand how their business works to be able to justify, to your point earlier, like going to bat for that salesperson to get that product into the organization. So like understanding what they're doing now to try to solve it is something I think is so lost on so many people. And the fact that you're calling that out so early is freaking great.
Yeah, it's actually one of my preferred questions for understanding the level of pain. I'm not really big on quantifying pain super early because it's very difficult for the prospect to do that. And it's kind of made up and it feels very, very salesy. But the question is, how are you currently trying to solve this? If the answer is we're not, then it probably isn't that big of a problem, right? So you either need to go teach them that it's a bigger problem than they think, or find a bigger problem, right? Or it's not a deal, which is okay too. Like not everybody we talk to is going to be a deal, and that's just fine if we move forward. But yeah, there's the There's the status, there's the find an internal solution that they're not currently using. There's continue using the same internal solution. There's all sorts of ways to look at status quo. But at the end of the day, if you have a problem, they're not actively trying to solve. They're not looking at your competitors. That's not usually a good thing. Let's talk about the interrogation piece. Like, these are just super uncomfortable when I'm on them, because you can almost feel the air coming out of the room or the Zoom call, whatever, when the rep just starts bombarding the buyer, and they just get more and more short with their answers as it progresses. At the highest level with executives, I often hear, look, you asked me for this meeting, why don't you just tell me what you do? And they just cut off discovery altogether. They won't tolerate it, right? And so the challenge here is we do need to ask questions. We don't want the discovery to turn into a presentation. We do want to have a dialogue, though, asking a lot of questions. So two of my favorite ways to make this less of an interrogation and more of a conversation is context and value. And so context is to help your buyer understand why you're asking the question. When a prospect understands that it is a well thought out, well-intentioned question that will actually help you determine if you can help them, they are more willing to answer. So for example, going back to the Clary example, I could ask the question, Mrs. VP of Sales, how are you currently deciding what deals to review? And just cut it off there, right? Like, not a terrible question, it's open-ended, talks about a use case. But what if I asked the question, like, I'm super curious how you're currently finding the deals to evaluate. The reason I ask is a lot of companies just look at the biggest deals and focus on those, and they end up losing out on some of the middle-sized deals that are actually much more able to be influenced by leadership involvement. Curious how you make sure that you're involved in the deals that you're most likely able to influence, not just the biggest deals that might be fluff. So now I'm given a reason for I want to understand the question, and also maybe making them think a little bit about how they're approaching it, and hopefully they think, oh wow, maybe I should be doing it a little bit differently. The other one is to add value. I like to think of the psychology of reciprocation. When people receive things from you, they're more likely to want to give back. And when you're asking questions and teaching or adding value, that also helps. And so a great way to add value is through case studies. And so if I'm asking a question, like if I was selling a customer experience solution back in my Qualtrics days, I'm curious how you are currently measuring your digital experience. We noticed with with a customer that they were having a 30% drop off in conversion rates in their app, and they had no idea why. By implementing our solution to understand the why behind that behavior in the mobile application, then go into the benefits, tell that story, and then ask about the how they're handling it again. And so adding some value, adding some teaching, recommending best practices will help break up your questions and make it more of a conversation and less of the interrogation. I think I saw way back early in my selling days, and it was fairly impactful for me. I think it was a Gong study, but we all know that we want discovery to be roughly 50-50 talk time, seller, buyer. But what that often looks like is the first half of the call is just questions, and the second half of the call is just like this pitch vomit, this verbal demo, and then begging for next steps. We want it to be 50-50 balanced throughout the entire call as a conversation. Any questions on the avoiding the interrogation pitfall that puts our buyers unease? Would love to hear about building trust.
Go ahead, Tony. Chime in.
Hey, Kyle. Tony here. I kind of come from the same background as you. I was at a company called Content Square Clicktail for many years, partnered with Qualtrics, and managed accounts across the country and Latin America. And everything you're saying here is right on par with what I did in my approach to sales and the discovery process. But just love to hear from you, just as you go through that. One thing that for me that really I benefited from is trying to build that trust factor and not coming across salesy. And you do such a good job of just organizing and kind of spelling it out, which I don't know how to do that part that well in coaching. But love to hear from you. Like, how do you with the reps being in a management position, what you did there to instill that, because Qualtrics was cutting edge. Not everyone bought into it. Voice, my partnership with Content Square and ClickTail was with the voice of customer piece and being able to quantify the revenue that we generate from one person complaining about something, but affecting many others, right? How do you come across believable and building trust with your customers when you're trying to pitch them that?
Yeah.
Are there any tips there?
Yeah. Let me peek ahead at one thing. Okay. So we'll actually go a little bit deeper into this in the next concern, because it's the trust aspect is this rep is only here to make a sale. This rep is going to close this deal, whether or not I'm going to benefit from it. They want to get a contract signed and then disappear at somebody else's problem, right? And so the trust factor, part of it is coming across as a partner, knowing their business, adding value. I have a goal whenever I join a sales conversation, when I'm running a deal cycle. My goal is that even if they never buy from me, they're still going to benefit from working with me in the sales cycle. They're going to learn something they can use regardless of the solution they buy. So that's an aspect. The bigger piece of it, though, I'll address the concern number 3, is making them aware early on and throughout that if you find that it's not a good fit for them, you're not afraid to call that out and break off the deal. You're not afraid to disqualify them and send them the right way.
Yep.
We'll go deeper into that. It's a really important point. I think I see another hand raised.
Yeah, this is Matt. A lot of good stuff in here. Thank you. I think the 2 things that are jumping out at me from my experience is really, around questions and going in with hypothesis. You can't do that unless you allocate time for preparation, right? And there's really no excuses these days with all the resources that reps have, especially now with AI. But it's amazing how many reps don't put in the time, and it usually comes down to either lack of time management or they're just lazy. So that's one thing that jumps out at me is preparation. I think is often something that, at least from my experience, gets overlooked, right? It's like, okay, you got to do a thorough discovery or you got a prospect, but if they're not putting time in leading up to that, it's not going to be as successful as it could be. The second thing, it's interesting that you used the word interrogation, because I literally a couple years ago, I had a CIO tell me, this feels like an interrogation, right? And I think ever since I heard that, I changed up my opening. And I believe in agendas that include objectives, but I think it's critically important to kind of walk them through, especially if they've never done business with you or it's an acquisition type role, to explain to them, hey, we're a little bit different. In order for us to understand whether we are a fit or not, there's going to have to be some back and forth from a dialogue conversation standpoint. Are you comfortable with that? Right. And I think you'll typically find that if they're not serious, if it's not an impactful thing that they have to solve for, it doesn't directly impact them. They're just kind of information gathering, et cetera. They may not want to go on that journey with you. So again, as you alluded to, it's just important to qualify things out as it is and maybe even more importantly, because that's where you're spending your time. So thanks for sharing this.
Love that. And I think as you progress through the sales cycle, you have to continually get their buy-in, because the amount of effort they need to put in to actually procure a solution increases. One of the favorite things that we do at Mongo is we have this engagement model where it's basically, hey, are we going to get serious now? Because if we're going to really get serious, here's what we need from your team. Here's what we're bringing from our team. These are real expensive resources from both sides. And if we're not actually going to do this, now is the time to separate. And that's why I think our win rate, once we get past that stage, is like 80% plus of qualified pipeline that closes, because we have the full buy-in that we're taking this seriously now. We've made sure all the way through that we're guiding them, understanding here's what we give, here's what we need from you, but we're never, ever, ever asking things from the buyer that we could get ourselves, right? That's where the difference between I need things from you versus I did my research. Let's go deeper with insights only you can give me that I'm not going to get from Google, LinkedIn, your website, case studies, etc.
Agreed. Thank you.
Then Dean, I think Dean had a question.
Dean, did you want to ask your question? You had said
No, no. The only question I was going to ask, and he just answered it,
okay.
but the cost of inaction, a lot of times, how you drive the urgency of it, and you just answered that. So thanks.
Awesome.
Okay, great. What about Jason?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. Do you have like a verbal mutual agreement with the customer and what you just talked about, or do you have a written or both?
Yeah, so we do, when we define the engagement model, we put out the timeline, we put out the resources, and get a verbal buy-in. We don't ask them to go sign a contract or anything to confirm it. That just adds, I've seen companies that do that. And while I like the desire to go force attention to it, that's just adding unnecessary legal review friction because most large companies can't sign anything without getting it reviewed. But yes, we walk through extensively what will be required and we get their buy-in verbally.
Quick follow-up on that. Do you have like a proof of concept guide or something that you're looking for agreement on, or after you get follow-up, do you summarize it in an email in some sort of way that allows them to be able to line up those resources?
So the initial is more high level, and part of the actual POC is to go define success criteria, how it's going to be tested, what resources are needed, and then that's all an extensive documentation, usually in some kind of a shared Google Doc or some type. It can get pretty messy when you talk about database testing and application testing. Awesome. Let's move to this last one, and it's probably the most important when it comes to buyer psychology, because I would be surprised if you ever sold to a buyer that at some point in time hasn't been sold something they didn't need or ended up not working like it was supposed to and that they regretted. Okay. And so, fair or not, the perception of buyers is that sellers will try to sell regardless of if it's the right long-term solution for them. And so their walls are up. So whenever you talk about ROI, you talk about proof points, you talk about all these great after scenarios, they're super skeptical because of course you're going to say those things. And whether or not their use case is a great match for your solution or not, you're still going to lean on those case studies and data trying to force the sell. And so the first way to overcome this is actually a personal psychological change, and it's the abundant versus scarcity mindset. Okay, a rep with a scarcity mindset needs to win every single one of their deals to hit their quota. They feel like they have limited territory. They feel like they need to go basically bat 1,000 across their opportunities. They're never going to disqualify an opportunity. They're going to hang on until the buyer says no so many times they have to stop, right? Where a good seller knows that for all the time that is spent chasing the bad opportunity is time they could be spending finding better opportunities. And so having the abundance mindset prepares you to actually be intellectually honest and disqualify bad deals early. And the earlier, the better, right? Empowering the no is a natural segue from that mindset. When I was selling, I would do like a hard close to get them to opt out at the end of the discovery call. It was the base what we discussed today. The value that I believe we could offer you is A, B, C. We would achieve that by helping you improve in how you handle X, Y, Z. Is that a big enough value to continue to evaluate this? If not, it's completely fine. And if they'd opt in, we'd keep going. If I go to the demo, same thing at the end of the call. You've now seen how I would solve this problem. Is this a big enough improvement on how you're handling your business? And do you believe enough it's going to lead to the right outcomes that it's worth your time to even look at pricing? And if they say no, okay, we get out of it. And that continues all the way through with the proposal review. Is this worth your time to go actually try to get consensus internally? I keep disqualifying every stage because if I'm going to lose a deal, the earlier, the better. And so I make the buyer aware right at the beginning, I'm completely okay if this is not the right fit for you. We'll part ways. That's completely fine. And they see that sincerity. And because I keep doing it, they know, they believe that if I really think it's a bad fit, I'll let them know, right? And so being willing to empower the no helps break down the psychological barrier of this guy or this girl is going to sell me regardless of if it's a good fit for me. And then finally, proactively share why you might not be the right solution for them. And this is actually a really kind of a fun thing to do, because if you get really good at this, you can kind of share all the reasons why you might not be a fit, and you know they're not that important to them. So for example, if I was selling Qualtrics against a low-end cheap competitor, and their immediate goal was to go, well, I want to go measure our net promoter score and our customer satisfaction. But look, like if all you want to do is measure your NPS or your CSAT, we're the wrong solution. Like you can go collect that data for free with Google Forms. You can spit it into an online calculator to spit out the score. You should literally don't even buy our low-end competitor. This is a $0 project. We're the wrong fit for that. Now, if you want to actually transform your business based on customer insights, and you have the resources to go act on the feedback, we're probably a better solution for that. So I'm proactively calling out where we're not a good fit, where we are a good fit, to allow them to opt in and oftentimes aspire. The idea here is they almost want to say, yeah, we are good enough to buy Qualtrics. Or yeah, we are so innovative, we would want to buy MongoDB. You're almost trapping them against a less appealing scenario. But it's also being very transparent. Like if I'm selling somebody MongoDB and they don't really care about speed of development or how quickly they can get products to market, I'll disqualify them. It's like, it sounds like you want to differentiate based on services, not technology. There's no reason to go evaluate a whole new database. That's a lot of work to get you to an outcome that's not important to you. By proactively sharing the reasons why you might not be a fit for somebody and allowing them to opt in or opt out based on that, it breaks down the barrier regardless of the solution they're going to try to sell me, and it helps build some of that trust that we were talking about just recently. Any questions on overcoming the concern that they're going to try to pitch me and sell me regardless of the fit?
Not a question, but more of a comment around that approach you were just covering, Kyle. I actually tend to take that approach in certain environments in an interviewing setting when I'm a hiring manager, essentially giving people, especially when you're working a startup, all the reasons that they might not be the best fit for the opportunity if you're getting close to the fact that you actually really want to hire them, just to be able to pressure test that and to give them an opportunity to opt out. It's just crazy how, from like a psychological standpoint, that can impact people. And the reality is, like, you're not trying to manipulate anyone, you're just trying to be honest. And what that does is just, especially if you know, like Todd Capone, Transparency Sales, one of the first sales books that actually made me interested in reading professional development books around sales. If you're able to show your own warts and get out ahead of what makes you imperfect, it just compounds your ability to build trust and rapport with people because they know you're not full of shit like most people are.
100% agree. Whenever somebody asks me, because everybody in the interview process for Mongo will ask me, why do you love working at Mongo? I'll happily answer that. And then I'll also share, here are my 3 biggest frustrations working at Mongo. And here are the biggest frustrations that my teammates have. Because the reality is the worst outcome for anybody, especially for hiring, is that they join and regret it. That's a terrible outcome. So I'm going to tell them all the dirt up front. There's no surprise of joining my work. You know exactly what you're going to get. And no one can ever tell me, Kyle, you never told me. Yeah, I did. I told you. I explicitly told you about this. Dan, how often can you help me understand that question?
Yeah, no, Kyle, I appreciate it. One, love this conversation, especially, with a high IQ sales guy like yourself that understands the buyer. I'm just rolling out of SKO where it's all like sales journey. So this is refreshing. Always doing the takeaway, really like that, doing the no. How often post-sale then do you go in and validate with the buyer or with the team, whether it's yourself or a third party, go, how, were we on par with this? Did this move the needle?
Yeah. So I wasn't as good at this as I should have been at Qualtrics. I'm getting much better at it at MongoDB because our motion is a consumption motion. We don't do upfront contracts very often. It's pay, we size you, then you pay as you go. And so a big part of my role is not just to get people to agree to use Mongo, is to actually go successfully use Mongo. And so our sales process doesn't finish at contract signature. Our sales process finishes at customer live, happy, consuming, successful. And so it actually requires us to completely change everything in the sales process to be extremely buyer centric, because if they don't get value, we don't get value. So that's I wish I could say, oh, I just naturally more for the sales leader got really good at this, when the reality is our sales motion has necessitated me to get much better at this. But it's been really cool. Evan, this sounds like a champion-centered model. How does this fit more into multi-threaded stakeholder model, each with a different concern? So a lot of the dealing with the multiple stakeholders is to get the agreement to implement the solution. And so that's actually pre-sale behavior, because we're never going to get buy-off to go begin a migration or a launch on our application on our database without that multiple stakeholder approval. And then the success aspect has already been well agreed to up front. And if implementation begins, if it doesn't work, then they'll back out. They'll back out really quickly. But when I think about that question in the frame of the entire sales process, it's understanding for every different stakeholder, what is their personal win? One of the biggest misses I see sellers make is they get so fixated on the business impact, the positive business outcomes, the ROI, what the economic buyer cares about, forgetting that along the way, there's that 3 to 5 people that need to be personally motivated to push your solution through, or your deal can fall apart. And so if you're not having one-off conversations with everybody that influences the process to understand how they personally win with your solution or personally lose without your solution, you're going to have a really hard time crafting the business case that speaks to every individual that matters.
Kyle, just as a follow-up to that, how much, like, I feel like throughout my career, I've probably gotten in trouble for being really transparent. Because like, I think it's honestly because I just have terrible ADHD where I don't want to like play too many games. And I just, how much do you actually lead with like just the transparent justification for why it is you're doing something? And by this, I mean specifically you're having a conversation with one stakeholder and you're saying, hey, look, I know that this partnership's going to die on the vine unless I understand how this explicitly impacts you and your life. Like, how much are you actually articulating that to somebody to get them to open up a little bit more and showing your cards, as opposed to just collecting that information through dialogue? I don't know. Do you sort of see where I'm going with the question?
Yeah, it's funny because I err on the side of being super transparent and very direct. I was just on a customer call recently where I said, can I just be direct? And she was like, sure. I was like, look, there's really 2 options here. Option 1 is you move from Mongo altogether. Option 2, you look at this instance. I know budget's an issue. And we just went down all the top concerns and just laid out the pros and cons for all of that. I said, what did I miss? Like I love being direct and to the point because it saves so much time. Obviously, there are times when you have to kind of phrase things a bit more delicately based on the situation, but I have never found value in trying to withhold information, sugarcoat things, or make things seem like they're not, because eventually it comes out. And then even if you fast forward some of the deal by holding things back, those things always pop up later and then end just being brutal on your deal. That's the content I plan to walk through. Happy to take any additional questions on discovery specifically, biopsychology in general, or anything else that the group might find helpful.
What about the buyer psychology of the moment, which would be one of paralyzing, crippling fear to make any decision, spend any money whatsoever right now? Sort of trapped in this moment, right? The collective psychoses that everybody has.
Yeah.
How do you think about that and kind of getting around those types of, it's not even an objection. It's just like their mood, the way that they are right now.
Yeah.
I think everybody's dealing with that, regardless of what industry you might be in.
Yeah. Where most sellers make a mistake is they think if I can show them an after state that is better than the current state, I'm going to win. What they're not accounting for is the risk of change. Because anytime you spend money, anytime you implement a new solution, something can go wrong. And so the best way to get them to move off of that paralysis is to really make the current state untenable. If people feel like they can actually be okay a little bit longer in their current state, even if you have a really positive business outcome that you can provide, a positive personal outcome, they're likely going to be paralyzed by that risk. Because even though they might get to a much better state, it also might fail, and they might be the person that bought something that didn't work, or they bought something that didn't have the ROI that was expected. Nobody, or very few people, I should say, make that jump if they think they're okay with their current state. And so really diving into why their current state is not going to work short-term, middle-term, long-term can help nudge them off of that paralysis.
Appreciate that. Anybody else have questions, things on their mind they want to talk to Kyle about?
So what specifically do you say, right, when your team comes to you and they say, man, I had a great demo. This opportunity is moving forward. Like, I see you smiling already. Like, you know that.
Yeah, because every sales leader on planet Earth read that sentence. I would rather you tell me nothing.
Yeah, it's like I've never interviewed a salesperson that hasn't always hit quota. I've never heard a rep say they gave a bad demo. So that's why I laugh a little bit. So say the question again. So they say, hey, I had a great demo. What was the question with that?
Right. Well, so where this is kind of leading to, I like how you say objective versus agenda, right? So they should have an objective coming off the call. So if you're going to hold your team accountable, right, for outcomes from meeting with the customer, they get off and they say, yeah, it was great. What's kind of your coaching then, or what you want to hear? Is this deal moving forward, or are you losing early?
Yeah. So generally the first question I'll ask is, great, what's the next step and what's the agreed outcome for the next step? Because if the next step is, oh, they're going to get back with their team and get back to me, I'm like, okay, so the demo sucked. If the next step is, well, we need to go loop in the IT team, the senior engineer, because they want to understand better how it's going to work in this part of their environment. Like, okay, they saw the demo and they're actually envisioning how it might fit into their environment. That's actually a pretty good sign. But I can often get a really good feel for the health of a deal with two questions, or I guess two segments of questions. When was the last call? What was accomplished? When is the next call? What is the goal outcome? Based on those two questions, I can get a feel for deal velocity and how real the deal is based on those outcomes. And then I can dive in from there to get a little bit deeper on what the possible issues might be. But a good demo, in my mind, the customer leaves thinking and understanding how the solution or service would fit in their environment. It's not a high-level concept anymore, and they're thinking about the possible risk of bringing it in, and they want to involve the right people on their side to understand if that risk outweighs the benefits. That's a sign of a good demo. We're bringing in the right people to go attack that risk and bridge towards a solution.
Jason, go ahead, man.
I'm going to ask the hard question then. Do you change the sales stage based on a demo?
So it's a tricky question for me right now, because at Mongo, we actually have 3 different sales routes and 4 different sales motions. And so sales stage is not really something that it's kind of a different mapping with how we think about it. I guess if you want to move a sales stage, yeah, discovery, decision, presentation, that's completely fine. But I try to worry a lot less about how do I get this deal to the next sales stage, and a lot more about what information does my customer need from me next to continue to enable them to make a good decision on my solution, right? And so technically, if you move to a demo, the buyer should be at a state where better understanding exactly how it fits in their environment would progress them towards a decision. So that's a good thing. But really, the sales stage matters a lot less than the buyer stage. And it's not uncommon for sales stages to go backwards as more people are introduced, because our sales stage outpaced the buyer stage.
Kyle, this is going to be like left turn a little bit, but could you open to share where like the origin of sales introverts came from, like the name, why behind sales introverts? This is something that's near and dear to my heart. And then two, like I've been watching, and we've had the first couple conversations about the success that you've seen, operating as an effective leader while still being able to diversify your income, build out, productize offerings of your intellectual property, like to a great success, helping a lot of people with a lot of really great content. For people that are thinking about taking that first step, for people that are hesitant for whatever reasons to get off zero and start building something for themselves, when did you feel comfortable and confident saying, okay, I'm going to start to do this. I'm going to start productizing some intellectual property. I'm going to start getting this in front of people. I'm going to ask them to invest their hard-earned money in it. So detail or history around the name, and then any suggestions for people about when to know you should start.
Yeah. So Sales Introverts, the name came to me. I was just laying in bed one night and I was trying to think about, because I didn't want to do like KyleAsay.com. Not necessarily a bad thing, but also like I'm not that excited of a person. So I kind of wanted like an actual company name. And then I really indexed on how I used to feel like I would never excel in sales because of my personality. I'm very introverted. Like if you ever see me out in public, like at a party, I'm the guy that's like is scared to talk to anybody unless they approach me first. I really struggle actually in group settings. But it held me back because I felt like I would never be great at sales. So I didn't match the persona of a great salesperson. And so it started with the idea of what if I could help people that didn't feel like they were natural salespeople actually go get pretty good at sales while still being their own person, their personality, right? So that's where the name came from. And it was really hard getting myself out there. Like I started posting at SKO at Qualtrics. A guy got up and roasted me pretty heavily for those long LinkedIn posts that nobody ever reads. I need to send him my Stripe balance, actually. That's a good reminder. Like, hey, DUI, check this out. People are actually, they may not read it, but they're buying it. So it's all fine. As far as productizing, I wish I would have started sharing my journey earlier. I'm a big fan of people at any stage of their career talking about what they're doing, what's working, what's not working. Okay. From the earliest stage SDR to the AE to the sales leader, anybody. I love here's what's actually working. Not a big fan of the people that try to like act like they're not. I think that's not great with me. But if you're going to go productize something, make sure that it's actually really good. Make sure that you've used it and it's worked. Make sure people that you've worked with have used it and it worked. By the time I productized, I had used these frameworks to become the #1 AE, ran the #1 team in 2 consecutive years, grew from a team of 6 AEs to a region of 65 AEs, and we were leading out in every metric that mattered. Employee engagement, percentage of reps hitting quota, region quota attainment, attrition rates, everything. So I was like, you know what? I've proven that this works for me and a lot of other people. And then I felt good about selling it because people who pay attention. I have shared out my frameworks for free to a lot of people, rarely ever get feedback from them. They get it, they save it, they never read it. I consistently get feedback from people that buy my stuff because if you buy it, you pay attention to it. And so I've decided even if when I get to the point where this money is not an issue, not needed at all, I'll donate everything that comes in, but I'm still going to charge for it. Like because people that pay attention, and I'm a big believer in that. If you take it seriously, you'll invest in it. So that's my advice. Like if you're at the point where you have something that's worth paying for and you've vetted it yourself and with others, go for it. Like you have very little to lose and everything to gain.
I love that. People who pay attention. Also, I'm dying when you said maybe I'll just show them my Stripe balance. Well played. That was pretty funny. What else we got? Anybody else have any questions for Kyle before we wrap up? Go ahead, Tony.
I mean, I'll throw another one out there, Kyle, and it goes back to this customer experience space that I came from and you came from as well. One of the big challenges I had, and I'm assuming maybe you had it or other folks there, Qualtrics had it, selling to retail in Q4. I mean, how do you create urgency? How do you get past the website's frozen, we're not going to do anything? So I'm now in insurance space, and so hurricane comes around, insurance companies don't want to talk to me. They're inundated with claims. But just kind of curious, just if you could share just any tips or tricks, or maybe there weren't any when it came to retail during the holiday season to get anyone's attention. I don't know, but kind of throw it out there. Creating urgency. What do you have there?
Yeah, so I'll give you a lame cop-out answer. You can't really create urgency. You have to uncover urgency. And so unless your solution is going to help them have a material increase in holiday sales or materially reduce the risk of something bad happening during holiday sales, you don't have a deal for Q4 in retail. And so focus on your non-retail deals. And so smart companies that do this well, if they have verticals and they just had a retail vertical, your Q4 quota is going to be a lot lower than your Q1 quota because they'll understand the cyclicality of the business, right? And then if you're an organization that doesn't have siloed verticals, you have a balanced territory, you know that Q4 is an okay time to maybe get some meetings set for Q1. But unless I have a deal really close to closure, I'm not trying to open up a 3-month sales cycle in November with a retailer.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Exactly what I was doing. Yeah, same issue, same thing. I had retail, but I had other verticals back in the day. Now, insurance, I only have one vertical. So if a hurricane hits, I'm on standby for a while.
If a hurricane, I remember I was selling to a company that was like Airbnb acquired them. They did vacation homes, mainly in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And nasty storms wiped out like 40% of their properties. And so at first I was like, man, how am I going to figure out a way to get my deal done? And I was like, Kyle, don't be an ass. Step off and let them figure out everything, and then don't even bother them, right? So yeah, if a hurricane hits and you got to take a step back, then take a long vacation.
Exactly. Love it.
Anybody else?
Great show, guys.
Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, team. Kyle, you want to leave us with any parting shots?
That's great to be with the crew. Honored to be a part of Tequila Tuesday, episode number 88. If you haven't already, just hit me with a connection request on LinkedIn. Do any other questions on this, any of the things we discussed, shoot me a note, and I'll be happy to help.
Cool. And where's the best place for people to find you and engage with your stuff? LinkedIn, and then your Sales Introverts site. There's your course.
LinkedIn, my courses, but LinkedIn is a great place to start with me.
Cool.
I'm going to start to tweet a little bit. So if you want to be my 109th follower, you can go find me there and encourage me to start to build there. But honestly, I'm intimidated by Twitter, so we'll see how that.
It's a long road on Twitter. Jesus,
I can't
handle the trolls.
That's what I'm worried about. I'm like, people on LinkedIn are pretty nice. So
they're pretty nice. I don't know about that.
Kyle, this was awesome, man. Seriously, thank you so much, man. This was
We
great.
appreciate it, Kyle. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you next time.